And thanks for staying with us here on Morning Live. Now, President Ramaphosa's weekly letter yesterday focused on the escalating violence marking the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. And the president saying, among other things, that the situation between Israel and Palestine is deeply troubling and that the senseless bombardment will have devastating consequences for the more than 2 million civilians and their livelihoods. Now, while the president is within his rights to comment on international matters, questions do, though, arise about the abuse of power and, of course, human rights violations by law enforcement here at home in South Africa. The outbreak of the coronavirus in 2020 laid bare the brutality of the country's law enforcement agencies. And this, of course, prompted human rights lawyer and activist Advocate Thembeka Ngcukaitobi last year to write an article entitled, "Does a Crisis Time Law Application Override the Constitution?" And this, of course, asking whether this government has learned from its past. And human rights lawyer and legal research officer at the Legal Resources Centre, Edwin Makwati, joins us now to discuss some of these issues. Edwin, thanks so much for speaking to us. Welcome to Morning Live once more.
Thanks for having me, and so good morning to the viewers.
So let's start with the situation in the Middle East, and very topical at the moment, but topical once again. And I'm not even sure that this is a necessarily productive way or, a good way to look at what is happening in the Middle East, because we've been here before. This is something that flares up every few years, and then we seem to be lulled into a sense of comfort about things over there. But all the while, people are getting killed. The human rights atrocities continue to be committed, but we only seem to focus on it when there's an escalation in the levels of violence. So what's your take on what's happening over there?
Yeah, like you said, the issue of the Middle East is one that is not new. It's been there. I think since I was born into that issue. I've been listening to it on the radio since I was about 7 years old or so, and it keeps coming back. But when many people talk about it, it's like, oh, it just happened. So everybody's like kind of shocked about the atrocities going on there. And this also gives us one kind of concern. It's a very political issue that, instead of being solved in a more pragmatic and practicable way, is mired in politics to the extent that it actually is an obstacle. The politics are an obstacle to the solution, to the solution that can be harnessed through genuine dialogue and honesty and good faith between the parties. I think there's a lot of suffering of the people there in Palestine. And if the world was to come together and put politics aside, these petty politics aside, the solutions could be there. But of course, we know what's going on. There's this geopolitics that take place and tend to trump everything that is humane, that is socially acceptable.
But obviously that is not acceptable because there's a continuous loss of human life. And just to quote from the president's letter, where he actually says, the escalating situation in Israel and Palestine affirms once more what we South Africans know too well, that intractable conflicts can only be solved through peaceful negotiation. And then goes on to say it also demonstrates that unless the root causes of a conflict are addressed, in this case, the illegal occupation by Israel of Palestinian land and the denial of the Palestinian people's right to self-determination, there will never be peace, unquote. So the president, very clear, unambiguous as those before him in the leadership of the ruling ANC have been about the Palestinian question. But what more can or should South Africa be doing at this stage in order to take a firm stance? And what should the rest of the world be doing? Because surely we cannot continue to talk about this conflict indefinitely.
Surely South Africa has a role to play. In Africa alone, South Africa is our political. When South Africa, most of Africa or this. So we should be able to see more firm voices and vehement condemnation of what is going on happening in from South Africa's perspective. But South Africa and Africa's voices are rarely heard. We have seen at the UN when Africans speak, they speak mostly to chess and everybody leaves and doesn't listen. So the people that could actually be brought to the table by South Africa, the ambassadors of the countries concerned, and diplomats, and a lasting solution and a sustainable solution be found through genuine dialogue and practicable and deliberate action. Because you cannot expect different results by doing the same thing over and over. And that is what has been happening. Every leader has come and spoken, but we haven't seen real solutions being proposed and being put forward to stop the suffering of the people of Palestine. Because in this war, there's only one side that is really suffering, and it's the people of Palestine. And I think it's one thing that the world has to take seriously. It's one thing that the United Nations, which has told us that this will never happen again, especially after the Holocaust and other atrocities of the 20th century happened. We expected better. But the United Nations has got a hot potato in its hands and it's not able to really come up with solutions that can be talked about, either now or in the future, as long as they keep doing the same thing.
And then, of course, we bring it back home and we look at, in our instance now, a lot of talk around police brutality and what South Africans have had to endure even during democracy. And the president writes in that letter that South Africa's democratic transition is a lesson about the power of empathy, the power of negotiation and compromise. But during this democratic era in South Africa, what we have seen is police brutality is highlighted in cases such as that of Andries Tatane. There was the Marikana massacre. More recently, we saw the Fees Must Fall protest, the Nathaniel Julius case in Eldorado Park, and there are many more that one could actually rattle off. So what does that say about South Africa, and do you believe that South Africa has demonstrated that it is actually an empathic state?
When you speak about that, I think I got to change my tone of voice now when I come back to South Africa, because this is what we live every day. That's what we see every day. And when I read the president's letter on Palestine, I was like, if he could speak like this about the problems closer to home and in a place where he's got power to change things. Actually, he has got a lot of power that he doesn't know for him and those who are governing with him to change things and make South Africans feel that there was indeed a transition. As things stand, if somebody was in a coma during apartheid and woke up now, they wouldn't see a difference, especially when it comes to how police, especially black police officers for that matter, treat the ones that look like them. And then somebody then goes to the issue of critical race theory, that indeed you can see that racism cannot only be perpetuated by those who have got a different skin tone. It's not even an issue of color anymore. It's about another black man doing the same thing that the oppressors have been doing for years in the past. So the president has to come out genuinely, stop making it an abstract issue, referring to the history, but must talk about the present. We are living in the present, and I think if he takes steps together with his cabinet and his fellow governing people, they will be able to change a lot of things as far as police brutality in South Africa is concerned. I can talk about the oversight bodies that they established. The issue is whether they really meant those oversight bodies to function, or they put them in place as a diplomatic gesture, or to do what they are supposed to do in terms just to comply with international law. Because if you look at a body like IPID, it has become toothless for the very basic fact that the way it's structured was not meant for it to function effectively, because the issue of police brutality is a difficult issue to talk about amongst politicians. And actually, they don't even want to talk about it, yet they keep on referring to history, the very history which people are reliving now in the democratic dispensation, at a time when people should be celebrating the demise of apartheid. Some are asking themselves, are we still living in apartheid, but under those that are wearing the helmet of governance, yet being despotic as much as the apartheid regime was? So it's a shame that the president can speak about Palestine and Israel, but fail to address the issues close at home. And for me, that epitomizes the hypocrisy of the biggest bigotry. And I think it's something that we need to, as civil society and as human rights activists, we need to condemn with the harshness that it deserves.
And, you know, as a human rights activist, speaking of human rights, if we look at where we are currently in South Africa, there is a sense right now, albeit anecdotal, that South Africa is on autopilot, that there's a sense that we are living under a state of lawlessness at the moment. Do you believe that there is an actual regression in terms of upholding human rights in South Africa currently?
I don't think there's a regression. I don't think there was ever change in 1994. You see, a regression, you're talking about something that there were gains made and then there was a reversal. But if you look at the statistics, they don't show that there was a change. There was just cosmetic changes. You change the name of the SAPS, for example, or you change the uniform that they wear. You change ranks, the rank structure. But the behavior, the conduct, the culture is still the same. So there's no regression, but there is stagnancy. There's never been. It's like a malnourished child who wasn't fed from the time apartheid ended, and then you put people in power, but they fail to change anything, especially in the way they treat the people. They talk about dignity, but where's the dignity of the poor and the marginalized people? They talk about freedom and security of the person. Many people have never realized that. In many cases, the people that we talk about are people who have not done anything wrong. It's innocent people. You have seen the story of the man who was killed in the best protest recently. Just an innocent man coming out of the hospital and gets shot for nothing. The story of Nathaniel Julius, for example. And many before that. It's just that these issues have now gotten more spotlight, but they've been happening since 1994. The culture started when the TRC ended that they refer the cases, over 300 cases, to the NPA for prosecution. What happened to those cases? Still today, there's been a lot of going around and about to prevent those cases from being prosecuted. Now that culture is being carried forward. There are still people that they do not want to prosecute even today, for whatever reason. I think it's political expediency, or for whatever reason that they think the cases like that should not be prosecuted. Maybe it's the stigma that is attached to issues of torture and other cruel treatment. Maybe they want to be seen as having done something better than the apartheid government did. So they try to kill the reality and mask it and put a veneer of democracy and human rights rhetoric in their talk, but not in action. So no, I don't think there was a regression. I think there's something that needs to be done to move from 1994. It's just been a flat line and nothing else.
So what about the agency of the citizenry? Because when you say it's been a straight line, we've in fact just moved sideways. There hasn't been any real progress in this regard, which I'm sure government will dispute in many ways. But where's the agency when it comes to things like the prosecution of the TRC, the files that were referred to the NPA, who have yet to act on them to this day? So what can the citizens of this country do in the event that the politicians, for some or other reason, are not willing to or able to move on these tasks? What should the citizenry do?
You might have realized that South Africa is one country where there's a lot of protests year in and year out, because people are trying to chase the status quo and challenge the government. You must do right, and people are tired of asking the government to do what is right. So what happened to the apartheid cases, for example? You would have maybe read the affidavit that was deposed by former NDPP, Pusipi Colin, in the Nkadimeng case some years ago. That there is no intention at all to make sure that people are taken to task and accountable. The office of the NDPP is the one that can make sure that these things that are happening of impunity, or total impunity for that matter, are dealt with. But if the office itself is captured, it's not able to function, there's a problem. There's nothing that's going to happen. So citizens can only protest and speak out, and we do advocacy as for example, the Legal Resources Center and other organizations that deal with these issues. But is there political will? If NDPPs are fired for trying to deal with cases of this nature, who is going to be willing to do it? The office of the NDPP has had about 10 people within a period of 20 years, when they should actually, we should be on the third or fourth NDPP right now. But there's been about 10 people. It's a very hot seat. So it's not easy for those people who sit on that chair of the NDPP to prosecute anybody, because there's a lot of executive interference, high-level executive interference, that prevents those people who are sitting there to take those cases on. We want them to, but I think they are in a very big predicament, because there are those powers that are higher than them. Even though the office is made to look independent on paper and in the legislature, it's not, because there's somebody who will be pushing and calling the NDPP at night to say, don't prosecute such and such a case, don't do this, and if you do, you're going to get fired. So what can the citizens do? You go to the streets. You tend to hold the people accountable by speaking out and protesting. It's a constitutionally entrenched right, which is also, when you go to protest, you're going to get fired with rubber bullets. You continue protesting until they listen. You cannot defeat the will of the people once they get into the streets and say, this is what we're going to do. If they keep on being resilient, not give up within a short period of time. I think that's the only way from where I'm sitting, because I work with these issues all the time, and I realize there's no will at all. You're speaking to walls, people who do not listen and do not want to actually do what is right, unless the citizens take a stand and do what they have to do.
Well, I'd imagine if the NDPP is watching this, Shamila Batoy, she's probably saying, but Edwin, what are you talking about? What do you mean that there's pressure brought to bear? We have changed the trajectory of this particular office. We are now trying to do the right thing. At least this is what we are being told. So when you say that pressure is still brought to bear on some of these institutions that are absolutely critical to making sure that the law is not only upheld but seen to be upheld, what do you have to back up that statement?
When I say these kind of things that I'm saying, I've got records. I've got records of hot records. I've got certain affidavits that have been deposed by people who said there. I have been able to read some of the works that were written also by, I think there was a letter written to the president by people who were commissioners of the TRC, which lays bare some of these issues. That's for some people who were members of the security branch, were detailed to investigate the TRC cases, to the extent that those cases never saw the light of day, because obviously it's like investigating yourself. I don't think that is reasonable, and that is playing people for, I think it plays people for fools. And South Africans are made to see this mask of expediency, of urgency that doesn't exist. If you can put somebody who committed an atrocity to investigate himself, then we got a serious problem. And as I'm speaking, I don't know if the people that are responsible are watching. They are probably asking themselves why I'm saying these things when nobody amongst them ever speaks about this. They find it easier to talk about things that are happening far away, but they find it very difficult to be genuine and honest with the people of South Africa about what's going on within their own borders and about the accountability of so many families that call me every day, that send emails to say, my son was killed by the police, this happened, the docket disappeared, the NDPP is refusing to prosecute, the NPA is refusing to prosecute. What's going on? What should these people do? Because legal fees are very expensive, and many South Africans, due to the inequalities that exist in the country, are not able to afford legal fees. So they give up, and they never get justice. 13 years later, they come and ask the LRC to help them with these cases, and they're not able to get the help they need sometimes because of evidence that is already gone, that has been eroded by the passage of time. So I think this is something that is, if anybody has got questions, they can always see our office and come to us and ask us these questions while we are saying those things, and we'll give them the evidence, because we do research in this field.
All right. Edwin, love that conversation, and I think we should take it forward at some point, but we have to leave it there. Human rights lawyer Edwin Makwati, and he is from the Legal Resources Center, discussing South Africa and, of course, the rule of law in relation to President Cyril Ramaphosa's weekly letter yesterday, which commented on the Israeli-Palestinian crisis, but, of course, also taking a look at what's happening here at home. And that's it from us for this morning. Leanne Manis?